Hello everyone, welcome back to another video of my opinions about classical music. If you are a new viewer, welcome, and if you're an old viewer, welcome back. Today's video is going to be a little bit different than most of the other videos I have, because instead of giving you my opinions about some classical music, I will be giving you some facts about the double bass. And if you've been on my channel before, you're probably asking what brought this on? And the short and simple answer is that my conservatory where I study have this subject called Advanced Instrumentation, and the final assignment for this subject is to make a video about an instrument that is unknown to you. And of course I know what the double bass is, and I've even composed for the double bass before, but I've never really looked into all the specifics of the double bass. So here I am making a video about the double bass. So, starting with the basics, the double bass comes in different sizes, but the typical double bass is about 180 centimeters tall. And a quick fun fact about that, I am also 180 centimeters tall. But as I said, the double bass exists in different sizes, so if you are a smaller person, you will probably choose a smaller double bass as well. The double bass is made from wood, as you can probably tell from the picture, but it's actually made from 3 different kinds of wood, which you probably couldn't tell from this picture. The back of it is made from maple, and the front is made from spruce, and also the fingerboard is made from ebony. And lucky for me, because it makes it a lot easier for me, the double bass has a lot of the same names for the different parts as the violin does. Starting from the top, we have the scroll, which is the most decorative bit on the double bass. And as far as I've understood, the double bass makers, or the luthiers as they're called, all have their own signature scroll designs. And below that we have the peg box and the pegs, which are the bits on the top of the instrument that holds the strings in place. Then going down the strings at the very bottom we have the tailpiece, which is fastened to the end pin. And these are the bits that holds the strings in place at the bottom of the instrument. And then between there we have the bridge, which is the little wooden bit that holds the strings up from the instrument itself. And I think the bridge is really interesting because the bridge itself is not really attached to the instrument. It is simply held in place by the strings, and the strings push down on it with a force of about 113 kilograms. Which, if you think about it, is actually about the same weight as one decently sized adult. So the bridge is a strong little guy, but it also has a very important job. And that is transferring the vibrations from the strings down into the instrument itself. And there are 2 things that helps it with this. Under the top plate of the instrument, on the side where the thickest string is an extra bit of wood. This bit is called the bass bar. Then next to it, still on the inside of the instrument, under the thinnest string on the bass, is the sound post. The bass bar is attached to the top plate of the instrument, while the sound post is just wedged between the back plate and the front plate. So the bridge helps transfer the vibrations from the strings to the top plate it is standing on, and then the bass bar and the sound post helps transfer the same vibrations to the rest of the instrument. And after the vibrations have resonated through the inside of the instrument, they come out through the F-holes, which pretty much is exactly the same as on the violin. So moving on, I mentioned the strings before, and these days they are normally made from steel, but they used to be made from catgut, which is a bit gross to think about. They are normally tuned to the notes E, A, D, and G, which is the same as an electric bass. And the interesting bit about the way it's tuned is that unlike all the other string instruments in the orchestra, which is tuned in fifths, this is tuned in fourths. And another fun thing to know is that on some basses they have built on a device that allows the lowest string, the E string, to be tuned all the way down to a C, which could be useful, for example, if you want the double bass to play parallel octaves with the cello, because the lowest string on the cello is a C 1 octave higher than the lowest C you can get with an extension on the double bass. But if you are in a situation where the double bass doesn't have the extension and you need it to play in octaves with the cello, there are solutions for this. The most obvious solution is of course to avoid any notes lower than E, but you can also just have the few notes that are too low for the double bass be one octave above. So moving on a bit from strings and tuning, even though we will get slightly back to tuning a bit later, let's go to notation. The most common way to notate the double bass is in a 5-line staff with a bass clef. And important bit of information here, it is notated 1 octave higher than it sounds. Meaning that if you see this note notated, the note you will hear is this one. Which also is the lowest possible note to play on the double bass if you don't have the C extension. The C extension allows for the C directly below this note. The highest possible note, if we don't count harmonics, is this G. And because this note and a lot of the other higher notes on the bass looks really stupid to read in the bass clef, sometimes if the double bass part contains a lot of higher pitches, they will read it either in tenor clef or treble clef instead. Normally, if nothing else is indicated in the score, the double bassist will play the notes arco, meaning with a bow. There are 2 distinct styles of bow for the double bass, the French bow and the German bow. The main practical difference between these is that the French bow is played by holding the hand over the bow like the other string instruments, while the German bow is held from the underside. There are some claims that the French bow allows for more maneuverability, while the German bow allows for more force in the playing. But if you're dealing with a skilled player, the style of bow doesn't really affect the way the playing sounds. And also it is worth knowing that if you write music, it is very unusual to ask for a specific style of bow. Anyway, since we already moved into playing techniques, let's just continue with playing techniques. The shortest possible explanation I have for the common techniques is that they are the same as for all the other string instruments in the orchestra. They have all the different ways they can use the bow, for example, détaché, legato, staccato, martellé, sul ponticello, sul tasto, tremolo, spiccato, sottile, and so on. They also have a few different ways to do pizzicato, the regular pizzicato and the Bartók pizzicato standing out as the most common ones. And if you've seen a jazz bassist, you will notice that they use pizzicatos a lot more frequently than a classically trained bassist. And also, of course, they have double stops, meaning that they play 2 notes at the same time on different strings. And of course, if you write music, it is important to keep in mind that there are limitations to how far one bass player's hand can stretch. So for the double stops, you can either have one open string, which allows you to play pretty much whatever you want on any of the neighboring strings, or you can make sure that the fingering of the notes you want are not too far spaced apart, and of course on neighboring strings. It is worth mentioning though that in an orchestra setting, or any ensemble setting really, the double stops are quite uncommon. The reason is that when you have 2 notes that are quite close together in a very low range, they tend to sound a bit muddy, which generally isn't the sound most composers are after. But if you are a person who writes music and this is the kind of sound you want, there is no reason not to write it, because most bassists who are somewhat skilled will know how to play double stops. And they do occur occasionally in solo works for double bass. And then of course there are harmonics, which, like the double stops, are more common in solo works than in ensemble works. There are a few reasons why you may want to use an harmonic. The main one being that you may want to change the timbre of a note, or the way the note sounds. Another reason may be that you want to reach a note that the instrument otherwise wouldn't be able to play, or it may be because you want the fingerings to be more practical. Whatever your reason is, the harmonics come in 2 variants. The first one is called natural harmonics, which you can get by dividing an open string into different fractions. Depending on the fraction you choose, you get different pitches related to the note the string is tuned to. For example, if you make an harmonic from the halfway point on the string, you will get an octave higher than the string itself. The second kind of harmonics are called artificial harmonics. These you get by fingering a note on the string like normal, and then you make an harmonic on the third or fourth or fifth above this note. And then depending on which note and interval you chose, you will get different pitches out of it. You may choose to use an artificial harmonic if, for example, the fingering works out better, or if the note you want an harmonic sound on doesn't exist in the natural harmonics on the instrument. I cannot explain all the different options for the harmonics, but if you are curious about this, there are many sources available for this, so a simple Google search will help you out if you're curious. Or if you are interested but you don't really want to Google it, you can leave it in the comments below that you want me to make a video about harmonics, and maybe I will in the future. But anyway, that summarizes the most common techniques on the double bass, and that only leaves the most exciting part for composers in the contemporary music genre, the extended techniques. The extended techniques are all the other kind of playing techniques that are not as common to see on the double bass, but that could be very interesting to look at if you want to experiment with, for example, timbre in your music. It is worth noting though that some extended techniques will not be appreciated by the bassists, and that would usually be the kind of techniques that poses a risk to the instrument itself. So keep that in mind as I go through a short list of possible extended techniques on the double bass. The first extended technique that doesn't really pose any risk to the instrument itself and is relatively easy to perform is quarter tones. Unlike the electric bass, which usually would have frets, the double bass does not have any frets. So in theory, you can play pretty much any pitch you want between the highest and the lowest note on the double bass. For example, you can use it for quarter notes, which are the notes between the half steps in the regular chromatic scale. The notation of quarter notes are not standardized, but you can use these symbols to indicate a quarter higher or a quarter lower, or 3/4 higher or 3/4 lower. Or if you want specific pitches, you can write in how many cents higher or lower a pitch is supposed to be, compared to the standard Western notation. Another extended technique, which doesn't really pose any risk to the instrument itself, is silent fingering. And that basically just means that they press down the notes with the left hand without doing any bowing or pizzicato or anything else with the right hand. And of course, silent fingering is possible on all the string instruments, but you get more sound and pitch from it on the double bass because of the big resonance box. This technique also doesn't have any standard notation, but one option is to write it with cross note heads and then write silent fingering above it. Another extended technique, which also doesn't really pose any risk to the instrument itself, but some bassists will not want to do it anyway because it wears a bit on the strings, is bowing on or behind the bridge. Bowing on the bridge gives a brushing kind of sound. Bowing behind the bridge gives you a high-pitched whistling sound, and you can even get harmonics on this part of the strings. Without being an expert on this, as far as I've understood, the way to notate this is with empty note heads or square note heads even, and then have the indication on where to bow in text above it. This notation also works for the next extended technique, which is bowing on various different parts of the instrument. Some of the suggested places to bow could be on the tailpiece, which has a really cool effect, so I recommend checking that out, or on the pegs. I would not recommend writing bowing on the body of the instrument, the resonance box, unless you have a specific agreement with a specific bass player who is willing to do it. Most bass players will not do this because it damages the varnish on the body of the instrument. The last extended technique I will mention is scordatura tuning. And what that is basically that you ask the bass player to tune the instrument differently than the standard tuning. This could be notated in a number of different ways, but a very common one is that you ask in the beginning in text that the bass player tunes their instrument to the pitches you want. And while tuning the instrument just slightly differently, say a quarter note higher or maybe a half step lower, is generally no problem, you should be careful with doing too big of a change. The risk of going too high is of course that the string snaps because the pressure is too much, and the risk of going too low is either that it's not possible to do any pitch on the string, or that the bridge falls over because, as I mentioned before, it is held in place by the strings. And with that short little list of possible extended techniques, I will leave it at that. I will leave some links for demonstrations of some of the different extended techniques in the description below. If you have any more questions, I would recommend either leaving them in the comments below, or you can check with your local double bassist, who will probably be very happy to help you, have more information than I do, and the ability to demonstrate the different techniques for you live. So with all that said, thank you so much for watching, and I hope I will see you in another video.